The disappearance inside ADX, the guard who vanished, the arrival that changed everything. Subscribe if you dare, because this is where silence becomes a weapon. Like this video, drop a comment, and join us in exposing the truths that were never meant to see the light. The desert road stretched endlessly, a black ribbon cutting through miles of emptiness. Overhead, the sky was starless, swallowed by a blanket of cold clouds. The only light came from the convoy, 4 armored SUVs, their headlights carving sharp beams into the darkness. Inside each vehicle, silence weighed heavy. No one spoke. No one even shifted in their seats. This was not just another prisoner transport. This was a ritual. At the front of the line, the lead SUV carried a man whose very existence seemed like a secret. His name was buried in redacted files, his face scrubbed from databases, his record tucked away in vaults where even seasoned agents whispered about it instead of writing it down. To the officers guarding him, he wasn't a man. He was a storm contained inside iron shackles, wrists cuffed with reinforced steel, ankles chained, waist belt locked tight. Every rattle of his chains was a warning. Whatever he had done, it had left scars in places no one could speak about. The destination loomed ahead, a fortress rising out of the desert like a scar. United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, built to swallow men whole. To erase noise, erase hope, erase the very idea of freedom. Floodlights glared across the perimeter, bleaching the desert in harsh blue-white. Watchtowers stood like silent sentinels, their narrow windows reflecting ghostly glimmers of the SUVs below. Cameras tracked every angle. Sensors buried in the ground detected every vibration. Even the air seemed electrified, as if the prison itself was awake, waiting. The convoy slowed. The sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed like bones breaking. Guards in full tactical gear awaited at the gate, rifles poised, helmets glinting. They did not shout. They did not move unnecessarily. They stood in grim formation, waiting for the arrival as though rehearsing a ceremony they had performed many times before. But this time was different. Everyone knew it. Inside the lead SUV, the prisoner lifted his eyes just enough to see the fortress through the reinforced glass. His stare was cold, unreadable. He did not blink when the gates opened with mechanical groans, did not flinch when flashlights swept across his face, did not resist when 4 officers yanked him from the seat and dragged him into the harsh glare of the floodlights. The chains clinked with each step, an unholy rhythm that echoed off the concrete walls. He walked without hesitation, his boots scraping the ground. To those watching, it felt like the walls themselves bent inward, eager to consume him. A guard muttered under his breath, "No one walks out of here." Another replied, "He won't even exist after tonight." They were wrong. Because the night he arrived, ADX itself seemed to shift. Hours later, deep inside the prison, Correctional Officer Daniel Price wheeled his cart down a solitary corridor. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, sterile concrete lit by humming fluorescent lights. Steel doors lined each side, each with a narrow slot no wider than a hand. Behind those doors, men who had once commanded armies, led cartels, or slaughtered without remorse now sat in silence. Normally, silence was comforting in ADX. It meant routine was intact. But tonight the silence felt wrong. It was too perfect, too heavy, like the air before a storm. Price slowed his steps, his boots echoing unnaturally loud. He glanced at the cameras mounted high above, their red lights blinking steadily, recording every second. At cell 23 he paused. The inmate inside hadn't made a sound during rounds. Usually there was movement, pacing, muttering, a cough, a bang against the wall. Tonight, nothing. Price slid the food tray through the slot, waited. No response. He tapped the door. Still nothing. A chill ran down his spine. Leaning closer, he peered through the small reinforced window. The interior was shadowed, lit only by the faint glow of a ceiling light. At first he thought the cell was empty. Then in the far corner he spotted a figure, hunched, motionless. "Hey!" Price barked. "Move!" The figure didn't react. He reached for his radio, calling for backup. But before the words left his mouth, the lights above flickered. Once, twice. Then the corridor plunged into blackness. Static hissed through the intercom. Every camera feed froze. In the control room, officers scrambled as the monitors filled with blue static, timestamps locked at exactly midnight. 3 minutes. That was all. 3 minutes of darkness. And when the lights returned, the corridor was unchanged, except for cell 23. Its door was slightly ajar. The control room erupted in shouts. Who opened that cell? Check the access logs. Get officers down there now. But the access logs told a different story. According to the system, no doors had been opened. No override codes had been entered. No one had touched cell 23. Yet Price, staring in disbelief, could see it. The door was cracked open just enough to show shadows inside. He backed away, heart pounding, his radio clattering to the floor. The silence returned, thicker, heavier. It was as though the prison itself was holding its breath. When backup arrived, they stormed the cell. Inside, the prisoner who had arrived that night was gone. No broken locks. No broken chains. Just absence. The bed was neatly made. The food tray untouched. The shadows seemed deeper than they should have been. And the only evidence left behind was the camera feed, blue static, frozen at 12 hours. Rumors spread faster than security memos. Inmates began tapping on their walls in coded rhythms, whispering through vents, scribbling messages into soap bars. He's gone. He's free. They let him walk. Guards avoided the topic, but their unease was visible. They double-checked locks, snapped at each other, kept their eyes on every shadow. ADX had always been built on control. But now, control had cracked. By dawn, the warden ordered silence. No press, no reports, no mention outside these walls. Officially, nothing had happened. Cell 23 was listed as occupied, its prisoner in compliance. Unofficially, a storm was building. But the real terror began days later. A VHS tape arrived at an FBI field office in Denver. No return address. No fingerprints. Just a battered black cassette inside a plain envelope. Agents scrambled to find an old player, sliding the tape in. The screen crackled with static before revealing footage. It wasn't from an official camera. The angle was wrong. It showed cell 23, the same cell where the disappearance had happened. The prisoner was pacing, his chains clinking faintly. Then, slowly, the steel door opened. No officer appeared in frame. The prisoner froze, backing into the corner. Shadows spilled into the room like liquid. And then a figure entered. Not another inmate. Not a civilian. The grainy footage showed just enough to make it undeniable. The figure wore a correctional officer's uniform. The prisoner screamed. The shadow moved closer. Then, just as the prisoner collapsed, bound and gagged, the figure stepped toward the hidden camera. A hand reached out, covering the lens. And on the wrist of that hand, caught for only a fraction of a second, was a tattoo. A simple cross, inked dark against pale skin. The screen went black. Back at ADX, officers swore no such footage could exist. Cameras didn't cover inside the cells. Hidden angles weren't part of the system. But someone had filmed it. Someone had leaked it. The FBI agent assigned to the case, Sarah Klein, felt the chill immediately. The disappearance wasn't a glitch, wasn't a mystery. It was an inside job. And the cross tattoo? It belonged to a guard. The notebook in the chapel. They said ADX Florence was a place that cured men of the need for secrets. The walls were too close. The doors were too thick. The hours were too long. Secrets rotted in confinement. That was the theory. Agent Sarah Klein had learned to distrust theories. The VHS tape lay inside an evidence bin, its black plastic dulled by age and fingerprints that didn't exist on paper. She had watched it 10 times, then 20. Each pass carved the same path in her mind. The frozen timestamp, the slow opening of a cell door that should not have opened, the uniformed figure stepping inside without a log, without a key swipe, without a trace. The hand lifting toward the hidden lens. The flash of ink at the wrist. A severe little cross, short arms, thick stem, nothing ornate, nothing sentimental. The kind of mark that said, "Remember this," more than it said, "Believe in this." She clipped stills and sharpened the frames. She isolated the tattoo. She patterned it against everything the Bureau had and matched it to nothing. Too plain to be gang-affiliated. Too blunt to be personal. It looked like a stamp more than a symbol. Back at ADX, the warden didn't blink when she requested another day on site. He was a man built for denial, polished shoes, polished hair, uncrackable tone. He signed the visitor pass while reading something else. She knew what it meant. You're tolerated, you're a problem, you will not be allowed to become a story. Klein stepped back through the gate where the air felt heavier, the color of the sky a shade paler, as if the prison drained pigment from the world. She kept her eyes forward, but she let the details score themselves into memory. The chill under the fluorescence, the chemical scent of industrial cleaner, the low hiss of HVAC through grilled vents. She had walked federal complexes, black sites rumored to be myth, county jails that battered the soul by accident rather than design. ADX was different. It didn't make a mistake about what it was. Officer Daniel Price met her in the Sally Port. He signed for her equipment. A digital recorder, a disposable notepad she never used, a body-worn transmitter that looked like a thin pager, and led her toward the special housing unit. He looked more wrung out than he had the week before. The skin under his eyes had turned a quiet purplish tone that clung to men who didn't sleep. "Still quiet?" she asked. "Depends what you listen to," he said. They passed the corridor where cell 23 lived behind a steel face, as anonymous as the rest. Locks clicked in sequence as they moved, a mechanical choreography that suggested control. Klein saw it the way she had after the tape: choreography, not control. The difference mattered. In the SHU office they watched another tranche of footage from the night of the disappearance. Doors remained closed. Timestamps remained perfect until the moment they didn't. At 12 hours, camera 04 fell into a pucker of static, the pixels squirming like fish in a bucket. At 12 hours and 3 minutes, it cleared. The gap did not exist in the logs. The gap did not exist on paper. But the gap existed. That was enough. Could it have been a maintenance cycle? Price asked. He asked it the way people ask if a nightmare could be explained by a late dinner. Maintenance cycles don't choose minutes, Klein said. They take them. Price folded his arms. You think it's a guard? I think someone with a guard's access solved a problem, she said. And I think he did it using a system that doesn't want to admit it exists. They didn't say the word brotherhood. It had floated up in rumors after the first week, weighted and vague, never quite resolving into a unit you could charge or a group you could name. But rumors inside a place like this have a set. They cling to steel seams, to laundry rooms where uniforms pass hand to hand, to chapel walls where men who don't pray stand as if they do, because the room isn't about belief so much as it is about sanctioned proximity. If you were going to build a hidden system in a fortress designed to eliminate systems, you would hide it in the places where two kinds of silence touch: official and private. Who oversees the chapel? Klein asked. Price's eyes flicked to the schedule on the corkboard as if the answer had printed itself there a moment before. Rotates, he said. Mostly day shift. Evenings it's locked. Cameras. 2. A wide in the rafters, one fixed on the door. Motion triggered after hours. Do the cameras fail? Everything fails, Price said. But not without a signature. She signed the access form. They walked. The chapel occupied the end of a hall that felt less like a corridor and more like a long inhale. Narrow windows set high in the walls dragged in a colorless daylight. Inside the space was spare and stubborn. Rows of thick wooden benches. A short altar, a splintered cross, a lectern with a gouge someone had sanded but never erased. The air smelled faintly of dust and something floral, a cleaner used only here, as if a different kind of purity was required. Klein climbed the service ladder to the rafters while Price stayed below, guarding the door in a way that pretended not to be guarding it. The rafters were a catwalk of raw metal and grime. Up there, the chapel felt bigger, the way a body feels bigger when you see its skeleton. Klein knelt by the first camera. The housing was intact. The cable was zipped along the beam with zip ties that had not been snipped. The units were motion-based, yes, but they rode a heartbeat of low-res frames even without movement. She popped the backplate, slid out the card. The second camera had been replaced last quarter. That's what the tape on the housing said in a hand that didn't want to be recognized. She removed the card. Back on the floor she slotted both into a portable reader. The time stamps at midnight stuttered. A wobble, a smear, then blank. Exactly 3 minutes. The same signature as the cell corridor. Price let out a breath you could mistake for a laugh if you'd never heard a real one. Maintenance cycle, he said. Klein scrolled backward. An hour earlier, a shape rose out of the benches and moved toward the altar. The resolution was poor, a digital watercolor of intent more than a person. But the shape turned just enough to spill a profile across 8 corrupted pixels. It was not an inmate. Inmates didn't wear that kind of jacket. Inmates didn't carry that kind of bound notebook. Price leaned closer. Pause it. She did. On the altar, a hand rested on a small black book, the kind you can buy in bulk, the kind you keep because it's easy to burn. The figure stood there, unmoving, as if waiting to be filmed. Then it turned and slid the book under the front pew, the movement neat, not furtive. A minute later the camera produced its midnight seizure. When the frame cleared, the figure was gone. Klein sat back on her heels. You ever get the feeling someone is directing you? She said. Price didn't answer. He didn't need to. They found the book under the bench in a place that would have been clean if anyone in the last decade had believed in cleaning it. Dust parted under Price's gloved fingers like a curtain. The notebook's cover was scabbed with scuffs. The first pages had warped to them as if they had once been damp. Klein's pulse ticked up. Evidence often announces itself with a little vanity, a little show. Look how ugly I am, look how ordinary, try not to touch me. They didn't open it there. She sealed it in a bag and logged it out of the chapel like a sacred object. In the SHU office they created a photographic run. Cover, spine, interior page 1, interior page 2. The handwriting was print block, each letter drawn like a verdict. Names, dates, numbers that read like payments. Arrows that connected cells with units, units with wings, wings with times that matched non-existent midnight maintenance. Language that pretended it wasn't language. Silent, move, clean, visit. On page 3, a symbol in the corner, a blocky cross rendered with 4 ugly strokes. The same geometry as the tattoo. You see it? Price asked, though of course she had. She paged on. The book did not confess in narrative, it breathed in patterns. Some entries linked to commissary accounts that didn't exist in the inmate system. Others tracked chapel, dock, laundry, like a map of pressure points in a body that pretended to be asleep. Then a line that made Price whisper a small, involuntary prayer, though he wasn't that kind of man. October 23rd, transfer complete, guard replaced. Klein didn't answer him. She read it again. The date matched the night the corridor froze. Transfer complete could be a van ride out of state. Could be a change in assignment. Or it could be what people write when they want to say, someone is not where you thought they were, and that's not an accident. Guard replaced, Price said, as if the phrase might choose an easier shape if spoken aloud. Replaced with who? With a man who looked like a guard, Klein said. Or with no one at all. They copied the pages. She bagged the original for evidence. She set the bag on the desk like a live thing and stood there a moment, surprised by the ache in her palms. She hadn't realized how hard she'd been pressing the book down as she read. Which officers have chapel oversight? She asked. Price called up the schedule. Names scrolled past, then settled on a cluster. She didn't know the faces, but the patterns were familiar. 3 men who liked to trade shifts, a 4th who pulled favors, a 5th who seemed to float. Where do guards keep personal gear? She asked. Each has a quarter, Price said. A small room. Locker. Desk. Nothing fancy. Who signs the log for after-hours entry to the chapel? Anyone with rank, Price said. And anyone they tell to ignore it. They split the list. Price took the east hall, she took the north. She walked past an office where 2 lieutenants argued in voices made soft by professionalism, past a break room with a dead plant and a humming refrigerator, past a door labeled with the black humor of institutions, wellness. The guard quarters were standard. Cinder block, thin mattress, metal desk, chair that had seen too many uniforms. Some rooms had photographs pinned near the bunk. A dog with one ear flipped the wrong way, a child's drawing of a house that looked like a door with a hat. Some were abraded clean of personal history, as if the men who slept there were passing through a life and not a shift. She knocked, announced, entered. Cleared the corner, cleared the closet, cleared the desk. She felt like a thief and a priest. Every room was the same until it wasn't. On the 3rd door of the north hall, the knob turned without resistance. The light was off. The air inside was colder, as if the room had held its breath since last occupancy. Klein clicked the switch. The jacket was draped neatly over the back of the chair. The sleeves hung as if they still remembered arms. On the desk, centered carefully, lay a badge. Not in a drawer. Not in a tray. Centered. The way someone sets down a piece when they've decided the game is over for them, but they'd like to leave you thinking it isn't. She didn't touch it yet. She stepped to the closet. The shelf held a folded extra uniform. The floor was clean except for a faint tracer of grit at the back right corner, where the paint on the baseboard had been rubbed thin by something that slid in and out. She crouched. The space didn't look like it had enough give, but the baseboard did. It wobbled just a degree. She slipped her fingernail under the end and levered gently. The board came away with a dusty sigh to reveal a shallow void cut into the plaster. Inside, a small roll of white athletic tape, a zip tie, a piece of plastic on which someone had traced a cross with a Sharpie. The lines thickened as if drawing them once had not been enough. She bagged them without ceremony. She did not announce her find over the radio. She had the feeling of being watched, not by a camera, not by a person, but by a decision already made. The badge on the desk bore a name, Stone. The letters felt like the thing they were, hard and unsmiling. Price, she said into her mic, voice low. I need you in North Quarters, room N7. He arrived in under a minute. He looked at the jacket as if expecting it to turn its empty shoulders toward him. He looked at the badge as if badges could answer questions. Then he looked at Klein. Michael Stone, he said. 18 years. Clean file. Clean files are always clean until they aren't, Klein said softly. Price swallowed. You think he's the one? I think this is the room of a man who wanted to tell a story with how he left it, she said. And I think the story he wants us to read is that he walked out on us. Price's radio crackled. Headquarters liked the sound of its own voice. All units, be advised, routine systems check in 5 minutes. The phrase brushed the air like a spider's thread. Routine. Systems. Check. Klein moved fast. She shot the desk from 3 angles, the badge from 2, the hook where the jacket had not been hung. She photographed the gap where the baseboard had been and the baseboard itself, the tiny vein of dust that had followed it to the floor. Then she did the thing part of her had wanted to do since she'd read the notebook entry. She slid into Stone's chair. From that angle the room felt different. The badge wasn't a token, it was a mirror. What it reflected wasn't her face but her place, outside looking in. On the underside of the desk was a rectangle of adhesive residue, the kind you get when you pull off something you meant to be permanent. She ran a gloved finger along it, then held it up. The residue lifted in curls, gray like ash. Price, she said. Did this man keep something taped here? Most of us tape schedules, he said. Roster. Maybe a photo. Or a small black notebook, she said. Something tightened along his jaw. You think Stone left it for you? In the chapel. I think Stone knows exactly what the cameras see, she said. And I think he knows exactly what we want to see. Her phone buzzed. Headquarters again but not on radio. A number that didn't present a name. She answered. Agent Klein, a neutral voice said. We've logged your evidence under 22AX04. Please confirm the notebook is still in your custody. Klein glanced at the sealed bag where the black cover shone like a slick. Confirmed. Bring it to Denver by end of day, the voice said. Deputy Director's orders. That wasn't the timeline agreed, she said. New timeline, the voice said. For security. The line went dead. Price pressed his mouth into a line. They're going to make it disappear, he said. He said it carefully as if the walls chewed up loose accusations. Or they're going to make it say something else. Klein stood and stared at the jacket again. It was a good jacket. The fabric was heavy enough to take a bruise, the stitching tight enough to carry weight. She understood the appeal of garments like that. They tell you matter because the thing that touches you is solid. She took one last photo then sealed the room behind them. Back in the SHU office, she copied the notebook again, then again, until she had 4 clean sets matching the original down to the stray pen stutters that gave away how hard the writer pressed. She cataloged each copy under a different evidence number and logged one with the warden's clerk, one with the bureau's on-site safe, one with her field kit, one with Price under a quiet note that said, training packet. It was a lie and also a kind of truth. Leave me 1 page, Price said. In case this all becomes a story no one believes. She tore a photocopy of the 10/23's entry and folded it into his palm. That's the page they'll say you forged, she said. Keep it anyway. He nodded. Agent, you should talk to Miller. Miller. The name floated back from a conversation she hadn't fully trusted at the time. A guard who smoked at the gate and told the kind of half-truths that allow a man to live with himself after speaking them. He had said, there's a prison inside the prison. He had said, certain men move because someone lets them. He had not said who. Where is he? She asked. Day off, Price said. But he'll answer if I call. Call, she said. Tell him I'll meet him wherever he feels safest. Price dialed and spoke the way you speak to a house that might be listening. He hung up and wrote a name on a slip of paper, Clement's Diner. He didn't add the highway number, he didn't need to. Klein stepped outside to air that smelled of dust and preparation. The sky had cleared to a thin blue without warmth. She felt the moment, this hinge when a case becomes a narrative you ride rather than one you steer. She didn't like the feeling but she trusted it. You ride for a while, then you reassert the wheel. The diner squatted off the highway like a survivor. Chrome trim dulled by sun, neon script doing its best to hum. Inside, the coffee was unnaturally hot and the pie was better than it had to be. Miller sat in a booth with a view of the door and his back to the wall. He wore a jacket that looked like it had once belonged to a different climate. He didn't greet her. He didn't shake hands. He said, you brought the notebook. I brought the idea of it, she said. That's all a notebook ever is, he said. An idea with paper. He talked in starts, like a man walking down a broken staircase in the dark. He didn't say brotherhood. He didn't say stone. He said things like some men have more keys than you can see and 2 o'clock is an excellent time to be invisible and the chapel is holy because no one wants to admit it isn't. Transfers, she said. What do you mean when you say transfers? Means you think you're watching one thing, he said, and after you find out you weren't. She pushed him gently with the names she could afford to speak and the dates she couldn't afford to ignore. He didn't nod. He didn't deny. The denial lay in the way his coffee went cold. Why help me? She asked. He laughed once, a sound like a tire losing air. Because I still want to be the kind of man who thinks a prison is supposed to hold the right people, he said. And because I don't like what I saw on a screen I wasn't supposed to watch. What did you see? She asked. He looked at his hands. A man who wasn't on any shift walked through a door he shouldn't have had, he said. And a man who should have been safe reappeared in a place where cameras don't work at midnight. They sat with that for a while. Diners are good places for truths you don't want to live with. The clatter gives your guilt something to blend into. Do you know the tattoo? She asked. Everyone knows a tattoo, he said. The question is, what does it mean? What does it mean? She asked. That someone wanted you to see it, he said. She drove back to Denver with the notebook sealed and a copy under the seat and a copy under the spare tire and a copy in a coat pocket that looked like it belonged to a different person than the one who had put it on that morning. She delivered the original to the evidence vault because sometimes the thing you do when you know you're going to be betrayed is to pretend you won't be and make them betray you where it can be recorded. Back in her apartment, the wind pressed cold palms against the windows. She laid the copies out on her kitchen table like a deck in a rigged game and moved them around until the patterns began to talk to each other. Chapel intersected with laundry, on nights where camera 04 yawned and pretended to be tired. Dock, aligned with overflow, on a week where a van left empty and came back with a dent no one had to explain because no one asked. The notebook didn't give her names. It denied her the story any writer would want. But it gave her something better if you are the kind of person who likes to wrestle a machine rather than a man. Structure. She could see where the teeth meshed. She could see where to jam the wrench. The next morning she returned to ADX with a warrant request half-drafted and a speech in her throat about the moral rot of systems that hide their own bruises. She didn't get to give the speech. The warden met her in the lobby with a face he'd assembled for a funeral. Your evidence was transferred, he said. By who? She said, the word not so much a question as a contour. By Denver, he said. Deputy Director's orders. I was in Denver when my evidence was in Denver, she said. And it wasn't transferred. It was placed into a vault I locked with my hand. He lifted a printout he could pretend he believed. At 08:32 a courier picked it up, he said. Your signature is on the release. She took the paper. Her signature was there. It wasn't her signature. It was a country cousin of it, a brisker, more obedient version of her hand. The page also bore the seal of a department that didn't use seals that way. It might as well have been done in crayon. But the archive in which that crayon now lived would not care. You have cameras on your evidence room, she said. He looked down, then up, then at the side of up. We had a maintenance cycle, he said. 3 minutes, she thought. 3 minutes to move a notebook from a bin to a pocket and a story from the sphere of things we could prove to a sphere where everything you say sounds like paranoia. She stayed anyway. She rewalked the corridor. She stood in the chapel and felt the way the space gathers breath even when empty. She visited Stone's room once more and looked at the badge like you look at a tombstone with the wrong dates on it. Price found her there. He stood in the doorway and didn't ask permission to enter, which told her he had decided something that didn't need her cooperation. I found this, he said. He held out a small rectangle of paper from the copier bin. It was a test sheet. In the corner, ghosted faint and backward, lay an impression. 10/23, transfer complete, guard replaced. Printer memory, he said. When you copy something, the machine remembers the shape a while. Leaves residue. I thought, in case they say you never had the page. She took it. It wasn't an official copy. It wouldn't pass a challenge. But it was a ghost. And sometimes ghosts are enough to haunt a man who wants to sleep. Where do we go next? He asked. We go to the person who taught the cameras to sleep, she said. Stone, he said. Stone, she agreed. They tracked his payroll punches, his vehicle logs, his PTO requests, his supervisor notes. They said he had family upstate. They said he liked to fish. They said he had a dog once. They said everything men say when they're trying to build a past that will be good to remember if they need to mourn. None of it held. What held was the room with the jacket and the badge and the baseboard that hid a roll of tape and a plastic cross made with a marker that had been pressed until it bled. Price said, if he's running we can catch him. Klein said, I don't think he's running. You think he's in the building. She thought of the notebook and the chapel and the timing of the midnight failures that lined up like choir notes on a page. She thought of the badge placed not hidden, the jacket draped not hung, the camera on the chapel that had watched precisely enough to ensure she found exactly what he wanted her to find. "I think he's doing what he's always done," she said. "Choosing what we see." A call came in from Denver, the voice neutral again, the phrasing exact. "Agent Klein, your cooperation is appreciated," it said, which is a sentence men say when they are telling you you've reached the part of the hall where the carpet ends. "Stand down from the ADX matter pending review." She said nothing into the phone's mouth. She set it down gently. She looked at Price. He looked back, and for a terrible second he looked like a man who could be persuaded these were good orders, orders that would keep him employed and unhurt. Then he shook his head once, a small negative like a tremor. "No," he said. "We don't stand down from ghosts." They didn't sleep. They reconstructed the missing 3 minutes across 6 different modules that shouldn't have been able to talk to each other, and yet did. Miller met them after shift in the dead lane behind the service docks and pointed with his cigarette to a junction box no one had serviced in 2 years according to the logs. The screws on its faceplate were shiny. The paint around them was not. Inside, a daisy chain of jumpers and a flash controller small enough to swallow. A cheap thing. Disposable. Effective. You plug it in, tell it when midnight is, and it tells the story it was paid to tell. "Who paid?" Klein asked. Miller shrugged as if he'd tried to carry that question and it had refused to be lifted. "Different pockets. Same pair of pants," he said. Price bagged the device and Klein photographed the box, and the world went one shade sharper. Where would he go with 3 minutes? Price asked. "Anywhere he had already put the keys," Klein said. They ran internal access maps, the kind that bloom on a screen with green and red and door counts. Stone's access was legacy level, an old architecture that had never been rescinded because men with decades inside accrue privileges in the same way stalagmites grow. One mineral at a time without anyone noticing until they are pillars. He could open any chapel door. He could open laundry. He could open the short corridor behind the infirmary where deliveries came in when deliveries were not supposed to come in. He could not officially open cells, but cells could be told to open themselves if the midnight said it was noon. They ran the path again and again until the lines deepened. Chapel to SHU to dock to quarters and back. "Look. A prayer." "Arrest warrant," Price said. She wrote it. A judge signed it faster than she'd expected, which frightened her more than the opposite might have. They assembled a team. They rehearsed the angles. They agreed on the language, professional, restrained, a courtesy for a colleague who might simply be confused. At 3:37 they opened the door. The room looked exactly as it had the first time, as if rooms could be preserved like insects in amber by the decision to look at them again. Jacket on the chair. Badge on the desk. Shadows arranged like props. The clock on the wall ticked once, a noise so slight it felt staged. "Clear," Price said. His voice came from the part of him that had learned to speak while his hands worked. Klein stepped to the desk. Something had changed. The adhesive under the drawer lip was gone. Whoever had peeled it last time had decided to tidy up. She opened the top drawer. Inside, nothing but the absence of things that used to be there. She looked at the badge. She couldn't shake the sense that it had been moved a quarter inch to the left. She photographed it again. The timestamp in her camera window clicked into the photo's corner. 3 hours 37 minutes and 2 seconds. Price looked at her camera, then at the wall clock, and smiled without humor. "Right on time," he said. She exhaled and held the air inside as long as she could, knowing she'd need all of it. Some cases become a contest of breath. Whichever side can hold it longer gets to tell the story. A shadow crossed the frosted glass of the hallway window. They flinched and turned, hearts embarrassing in their eagerness. It was Miller, face pale in the fluorescence, eyes flicking between them and the empty desk. "Anything?" he asked. Klein gestured at the room. "Everything," she said. Which is to say nothing at all. They left the door open in the way people leave doors open when they want the room to answer for itself. Down the hall, the chapel camera hummed its little hum, recording a room where nobody prayed at 3 a.m., waiting, perhaps, to gift its 3 blank minutes to someone who knew how to ask. Klein looked at the badge one last time and felt a small click behind her sternum. Acceptance. Not of defeat, she was not built that way, but of the shape of the enemy. She had wanted a man. She had a system built on habits. She had wanted a moment. She had a pattern. She had wanted a confession. She had a room arranged like a sentence. "Tomorrow," Price said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. But the story had already chosen its next scene. At 6:15, a courier signed for a package at the Denver field office. Inside, addressed to no one, lay a single sheet of paper torn from a notebook with block letter printing that looked both patient and bored. "Transfer complete. Thank you for your cooperation." Cam 08. The handwriting didn't match Stone's exactly. Of course it didn't. Why would it? The signature, if you could call it that, was the camera's name, not a person's. It was a joke or a threat or a nod. It was a way to say, the system is speaking to you in the voice you trained it to use. Klein read it, then folded it into the plastic sleeve where she kept other things she didn't know how to categorize. The sun had not climbed high enough to put heat in it. She wanted to sleep and could not. She wanted to scream and had learned not to. So she did the only reliable thing left to a person in a case like this. She went back to work. She interviewed a chaplain who loved his chapel and knew better than to pretend he controlled it. She followed a paper trail that pretended it wasn't paper by getting itself folded into emails marked routine. She checked the copier memory again and found the ghost of another page. A list of first names without ranks, without titles, like a roll call at a school you'd rather not enroll your child in. She asked Price, "How many of your men have crosses tattooed on their wrists?" "Not many," he said. "Enough." He wrote 4 names. She added a 5th. Miller raised his eyebrows when he saw it. "Him," he said. "The kind who gets overlooked," she said. They began the slow, tender work of building a case that could survive 3 minutes of midnight. It is emotionless work conducted by people full of emotion who must pretend the work performed itself. It involves forms and the refusal to be bored by them. It involves schedules and the willingness to find patterns in calendars other people insist are random. It involves asking questions repeatedly in different lights until the person you're asking tires of lying to the same question and changes the lie. Day bled into evening. The chapel camera blinked at motion and recorded mostly emptiness. That night, Klein sat with a coffee so old it had turned mean and stared at the screen as if she could stare it into telling her what it didn't want to say. At 0:12, a shadow moved by the altar. She tapped the keys, magnified, cleansed the image of the worst of its snow. The figure turned. The outline was familiar and not. Might have been Stone. It might have been the shape of absence wearing a suit of expectation. The figure rested a hand on the altar the way people do when they are either seeking support or providing it to something that needs it. Then it lifted the hand and walked out of the frame. The camera did not fail. It recorded the door closings and the settling of air. It recorded nothing extraordinary. It recorded the relentlessness of ordinary in a place that depended on it. Klein let the footage run to the end, then rewound it to the beginning, then closed the window. She took the notebook copy from her bag, the one that had begun to relax at the spine from being opened and closed. She turned to the page with the cross in the corner and ran her finger along the mark until the oil from her glove made the photocopied ink shine. "Tomorrow," she said again. It wasn't a promise. It was an oath of persistence. At 3:37 she walked past Stone's room on her way out. She didn't mean to look inside. She did anyway. The badge had shifted again. Not far. Enough for a person who had catalogued angles to see. She took a photo because to not take one would be to say out loud the fear she had entertained in private, that Stone hadn't left. That he existed now the way a rumor exists, not as a body but as an arrangement of attention. When she stepped into the hall, a draft caught the door and drew it shut with a soft click. The noise trailed her all the way to the exit. Morning came slower than it should have, as if it too had to get through a sally port. In the parking lot, Price rubbed sleep out of his face and said nothing until he had to. "They want to brief the press," he said. "On what?" she asked. "On our success," he said. His smile was tired and sharp. "We have restored order. There is no threat. All procedures remain intact." "And the man who is either gone or not?" she asked. He shrugged. "He remains." "That's not an answer," she said. "It is the one they will give," he said. She looked at the prison, at its right angles and right ideas. She thought of 3 minutes that bent straight lines into curves. She thought of a notebook that documented a system by refusing to call itself one. She thought of a room with a uniform and a badge and a baseboard compartment that had held the smallest tools a man needs to rewrite a night. She turned to Price. "We move on him today," she said. "With what we have. With what we can prove. With the device from the junction box. With the copier residue. With the chapel footage that didn't fail. We move." He nodded. She saw in the nod the kind of resolve that makes a person brave on the day they're going to need it most. They gathered a team. They coordinated with Denver because pretending to coordinate is a way of making people show you where they plan to stand. They walked the plan in an empty hallway. They spoke the words into radios that made them official. At 7:55 they hit the north quarters. At 7:56, they stood in front of N7. At 7:57 the door swung inward. The jacket remained. The badge remained. The sense of a performance repeated for a new audience remained. What did not remain was the small rectangle of paper Price had found in the copier bin, the ghost impression of the page. Someone had cleaned out the bin. Someone had learned what he'd learned and removed it, the way a person pats down a bed to disguise a body's weight after standing up. Price's breath stuttered. "I'm sorry," he said, though this was not his fault. Klein looked at the badge and saw in its curve a tiny, bright, unhelpful reflection of herself. The radio on her shoulder huffed to life. An officer in the control room reporting a small, brief, routine glitch in camera 08, the chapel feed. Not 3 minutes. 40 seconds. The kind of thing a person files as nothing, unless they have learned to count seconds like dollars. She didn't run to the chapel. She walked. Running would make the room feel important to someone watching. She entered as if she had come for a different reason and looked down as if she had dropped something, then up, slowly, to the altar. The benches were empty. The cross hung its unchanged shape. On the altar lay the humorless honesty of a detail that refused to explain itself. A single strip of athletic tape, the pressure-creased kind used to bind fingers in sports or to hold a cable where it shouldn't hang. It gleamed a little in the light. She picked it up, bagged it, labeled it, because that is what you do. You label the smallest things, and sometimes the smallest things tell a courtroom what the largest truths cannot. When she came out, Price was in the hall with a face emptied of patience. "Denver wants you at HQ," he said. "Does Denver want my case?" she asked. "Or my silence?" "Both," he said. She looked past him, through the window where the sky had resumed, pretending it was just a sky. "Tell Denver," she said, "that I'll bring them what they're owed." "What are they owed?" he asked. "The part of the story that belongs to them," she said. "And not 1 inch more." She walked toward the exit, the notebook copy against her ribs under the jacket, the photos on her drive, the device from the junction box in her bag, the name stone turning into something more than a person, into an outline a system pours itself into when it needs a man-shaped hole. Outside, the day kept on, immune to the fact that inside a building someone had perfected the art of rearranging truth into ritual. The wind lifted a spray of grit and carried it across the lot until it settled in a line along the curb that looked almost intentional. Klein tightened her jacket against the cold and thought, with a clarity that felt like the first breath after holding it too long, tomorrow is not a time. It is a tactic. She opened her car, slid in, and drove toward Denver to surrender a version of events that wouldn't end anything. Halfway down the service road, she pulled onto the shoulder and shut off the engine. The silence felt like a room you have not yet decided to enter. She took out her phone and typed a message to a number that had offered itself once in a diner between the clink of cups and the hiss of a grill. "Keep your head down," she wrote. "He knows we're reading. Send me what you can't carry." She didn't sign it. People who need to know your name already do. When she pulled back onto the road, the prison receded in the rear view until it looked less like a building and more like a clause in a larger sentence. She sped up. The asphalt hummed. She thought of the 3 minutes that had remade a night and the 40 seconds that had reminded her the story was not done. She did not look back again because the next time she saw the place, the headline would already be writing itself. And the first line would be simple, the way all complicated stories begin. A guard has gone missing. The vanishing guard. By the time the morning brief began, the rumor had outrun the truth. A guard had quit. A guard had fled. A guard had been transferred, promoted, disappeared, replaced. The building breathed these contradictions the way lungs take oxygen and give back something heavier. Men in uniforms repeated phrases because phrases felt safer than facts, and Agent Sarah Klein listened without answering because she was done asking rooms for permission. On paper she had stood down. In practice, she drew a circle and stepped into it. Herself, Officer Daniel Price, and the diner quiet guard who had decided his conscience could not bear the weight of routine Miller. 3 people with different angles on the same window. The plan had no elegance to it, only persistence. They would not force the system to speak. They would deny it the silence it needed to arrange its answers. Price printed shift rosters until the copier grew hot. Klein mapped the midnight failures across 6 months and laid the pattern over deliveries, chapel special services, infirmary runs. Miller, who knew which doors squeaked and which swallowed sound, walked them through routes that had learned to trust a certain pair of boots. When Klein put it all together, the shape was obscene in its simplicity. Midnight bought the flash of nothing, cameras blinked, doors behaved as if the hour were harmless. In those 3 minutes, you could move a ledger from a bench to a pocket, a man from a cell to a hallway, a uniform from a chair to a body that didn't belong to it. And when the feed returned, you had the photograph the prison needed, the stillness of order. They would break the loop by making it repeat on their terms. Klein secured an arrest warrant for Officer Michael Stone that read like a dare: conspiracy, evidence tampering, unlawful access to restricted modules. It was fragile, but it hadn't cracked yet. She didn't expect the paper to catch the man. She expected the attempt to flush the system that protected him. That afternoon, she visited the evidence vault in Denver with hands empty and left with pockets heavy. Not the original notebook, that had vanished between entries and signatures like mist, but the things that survived vanishing: the test sheet from the copier bin with the ghost of the transfer complete line, the jumper device they'd pulled from the junction box, the chapel footage that didn't fail, photocopies that had learned to be more than copies simply by being the only survivors of a truth. She returned to ADX and found Price waiting in the gray light just beyond the Sally port. He didn't say it out loud, but his posture did. "We are past the point where we ask nicely." "You ready?" he asked. "Ask me that after," she said. They hit the north quarters at 1900. Protocol played along because protocol doesn't know the difference between theater and arrest if the words are correct. 4 officers cleared the hallway. 2 held the stairwells. Klein stood at the door to N7 and felt the shape of the room before she saw it. She had learned to read a space through its door jambs and hinges, a kind of braille. "Open," Price said. The latch clicked. The door swung. Jacket on chair. Badge on desk. The cheap clock ticking a neutral rhythm. The air a degree colder than the hall, as if the room held on to something the corridor refused to keep. Klein didn't waste the ache that rose in her chest. She turned it into action. Photographs, angles, measurements. She brushed one fingertip, gloved, under the drawer lip. No residue this time. Whoever had taped something there had decided to stop teaching lessons. "Control," Price said into his radio, the only sign he'd heard the same decision. "Lock the floor. No movement until we clear." Static answered, then a voice. "Copy." Klein glanced at the badge. She had worried once that she'd start reading meanings into reflections. Now she understood the meaning lived in the repetition. The badge wasn't an object. It was punctuation. It said, "End of sentence." It said, "New paragraph." It said, "Keep up." "Chapel?" she asked. "Chapel," Price confirmed. "Miller's already there." They moved in silence through the short run of corridor, past the wellness door with its bright poster nobody had ever read, past the break room with a microwave that smelled like somebody's soup. The chapel door, when they reached it, seemed to have grown since yesterday, taller and less eager to open. Miller was waiting just inside with his shoulders squared and his eyes set on the altar the way a man faces a road he knows ends at a cliff. "No motion for 20 minutes, he said. "Camera steady." "Let's unsteady them," Klein said. She had brought something for this room, not a notebook. Those kept getting taken to a place where ink means less than consent, but a sliver of truth disguised as convenience. The jumper device, cloned and harmless, set on a delay to trigger a 3-minute hiccup at precisely midnight. The feed would cut. The chapel would exhale. And anyone who depended on that exhale would come to borrow it. They weren't baiting a man. They were baiting a habit. She placed the device where the last one had lived, in a box whose screws remembered the same hands. She pressed the schedule. The little light winked once, as if it had a conscience and had decided against using it. Miller watched the act with a face that had aged 10 years and 4 weeks. "You sure we want to invite him?" he asked. "We already did," Klein said. "Every time we showed up and found the stage set." They dimmed the chapel lights until the cross on the wall turned into a darker stroke of blue. Price took the side aisle where the camera's angle left a sliver of absence. Miller stood 6 steps inside the door, where an usher might stand on a Sunday that would never come. Klein climbed into the rafters and pressed her body against iron that hummed softly with the building's electric heart. Midnight had always been a number. Tonight it was a line. They waited for it. While they waited, Klein thought of the first night. The convoy's headlights cutting the desert, the hum of floodlights at the perimeter, the way every man had performed his role as if the script could protect him from improvisation. She thought of the prisoner who had arrived without a name and left without a path, of cell 23 and its careful stillness. She thought of the prisoner who had arrived without a name and left without a path, of cell 23 and its careful stillness, of the voice on the phone that told her to stand down because standing down was easier to harmonize with official hymns. She did not think about what would happen if they were wrong. There are nights when wrong is a luxury you cannot afford to imagine. At 23 hours 59 minutes and 56 seconds, the camera's rates shifted the way bodies shift before they sleep. At midnight, the chapel feeds dropped to static. In the corridor, a red light blinked like a heartbeat and then steadied into nothing. The device did its cheap, perfect work. A man stepped through the door at 34 seconds. He didn't announce himself because men who own rooms don't. He didn't carry a flashlight. His stride had the unthinking confidence of someone whose feet knew which boards would creak and which would hold. Klein could not see his face from the rafters any more than she had on those grainy loops, but she knew the build. The neck that tightened when he turned. The economy of motion. It had taken her weeks to accept that memory could be a sense. Tonight it was. Stone. Or someone wearing stone like a garment. He turned just enough that Klein caught the sleeve, a guard's jacket with the weight still in it, and the stark little cross on the wrist. The ink looked new. Not fresh but maintained. A mark tended like a tool. He moved toward the altar. Stood where men stand when they want to be seen without being personal. He placed his hand flat on the wood and left it there. Could have been a ritual. It could have been a timer. Klein wondered who he was waiting for, them or the minute that restored his invisibility. Now, she whispered into her mic. Price stepped out of the aisle's shadow with the warrant like a shield. Officer Michael Stone, he said, voice controlled enough to hover without shaking. You're under arrest. The figure didn't startle. He didn't even look surprised, and that, more than anything, made Klein understand how anonymity becomes power. It teaches you that surprise belongs to other people. He raised his hands slowly, theatrically, letting the camera that wasn't recording watch him comply. On what charge? He asked, and the voice had the non-accent of men who spend their lives in rooms like this. Conspiracy. Accessing restricted systems. Evidence tampering, Price said. We can add more. And you think you can prove that? The man said. It wasn't a challenge. It was curiosity, soft as a bruise. Miller moved to the door, blocking the exit with his body. Klein stayed above the scene, watching the air between them for a tremor she could use. The static on the monitor twitched toward clarity. 20 more seconds and their trap would become their record. Hands behind your head, Price said. Turn. The man obeyed, interlacing his fingers. The cross tattoo shone, a dark T on tendon. Price stepped close, flex cuffs ready. And then the man laughed, not loudly, not showy, just enough to put a hairline crack in the moment. You're late, he said. The chapel lights went out. Not the scheduled darkness from their device. A deeper cut like a hand on a throat. The building shuddered and the cameras died the kind of death that leaves no afterimage. Somewhere in the walls, a relay snapped like a bone. Klein swore under her breath and dropped from the rafters cleanly, muscle memory catching where fear wanted to slip. Her boots hit stone and she moved toward where she had last seen the man's outline. She felt him before she reached him. The cold pocket of air a body leaves when it chooses a different place to be. Price's flashlight flared and then failed as if the dark had teeth. Door, he shouted. Miller threw his weight against it and found it locked, not by keys or codes but by the absence of power. The chapel had become a box. Klein reached for the altar and found tape. Not on the wood, under the lip where a quick hand might have stowed it. She tore it free and felt the plastic cross they'd found in Stone's quarters like a joke in her palm. In the same moment, the lights surged back weakly and then stabilized at a dim, funeral brightness. The man now stood at the far pew, hands at his sides, expression calm. He had used the darkness not to escape the room but to rearrange the scene. In the near silence, the building cleared its throat, the whine of systems returning, the click of magnetic locks catching their breath. You came with a camera, he said, almost tender, as if complimenting an outfit. And you thought it would record. But the camera belongs to the place before it belongs to you. On the floor, Price said, gun low and steady. Now. The man lowered himself, knees to stone, palms out. No resistance. No protest. If he had wanted this to be a fight, it would have been. Klein felt the wrongness of his ease and leaned into it the way climbers lean into a slope to keep from falling backward. Miller, she said, not taking her eyes off Stone. Call control. Tell them we need a clean route to intake. Miller lifted his radio. It hissed, then answered. Clean route granted. Doors line A and B cleared. The voice sounded normal, and that should have been comforting. It wasn't. Normal in ADX was often a costume. Price cuffed Stone. The plastic bit into flesh. The cross tattoo whitened at the edges. Klein stepped closer until she could smell the iron of his sweat under soap. He looked up and his eyes were not the eyes of a cornered thing. They were the eyes of a man reading a book he'd read before. You left your badge, she said. You found it, he said. You left your jacket, she said. You photographed it, he said, as if the two sentences had been designed for each other. They walked him through the chapel door and into the corridor that had known more midnight than day. The cameras in the hall blinked awake at their movement, and Klein registered with a jolt the relief that comes with seeing something look at you, even if you do not trust its memory. Halfway to intake, the fire doors sealed. No alarm. No smoke. Just a split in the hallway, metal teeth descending from the ceiling like an argument. Price swore and backed them toward the side corridor. Those doors, too, slid down with hydraulic patience. The building was a puzzle turning its own pieces. Why? Miller asked. What did you touch? Nothing you can't report as a glitch, Stone said almost kindly. Klein scanned ceiling, walls, floor, all the places systems leave their secrets when they grow lazy. Above the doorway, a green LED glowed intermittent. Not a failure light. A preference. Someone was choosing hallways for them. Back to chapel, she said. Now. They moved quickly, cuffs digging, radios chattering, nothing useful. The chapel door accepted them as if nothing had changed. Inside, the air had warmed a degree, and Klein knew what that meant. The HVAC had rerouted. Buildings hide their logic in climate. Whoever held the logic had the room by its lungs. Price, she said. Turn him to the wall. Price did, pressing him forward, forearms on Stone. Miller braced the door with a shoulder, as if a body could hold against a building. You're not walking me out, Stone said, his words soft enough to make Klein lean closer to hear them, which was the point. You'll think you did. You'll sign forms that say you did. But when you write the report will write you. Klein didn't ask what he meant. She knew better than to give a man the comfort of his own metaphor. She searched him quickly, belt, pockets, collar, ankles, looking for the thing all operators carry, the token that lets them speak to the system without words. She found it under the inside hem of the jacket, a sticker no bigger than a thumbprint, layered with microtext. She peeled it and felt the warmth of the adhesive as if it were blood. What is it? Price asked. Identity for doors, she said. Disposable. He wears 1,000 names if he wants. Not anymore, Price said, lifting it between two fingers like a wasp by the wing. Klein bagged it, labeled it, because that's what you do even when the gesture feels small. She looked up at the rafters where she had hidden and saw the cameras winking back to life with a new, watchful slowness. Let's finish this, she said. They took him the long way, the way that required the fewest doors, the way a fire plan would choose. Doors opened. Doors closed. Each mechanical sigh felt like a vote they were winning by one. In the final hallway before intake, Stone turned his head and spoke without looking at any of them. Do you believe in prisons? He asked. Miller answered, not Klein. I believe in consequences. Stone nodded as if that answer had been offered to him on other nights. Consequences faith, he said. You can't prove it without making someone suffer it. On your knees, Price said as they reached the final door. It opened on the intake vestibule with a smoothness that made Klein's shoulders lift, the body's silly instinct to duck before a heavy thing falls. They processed him fast, hands steady, paperwork a blur of deliberate squares. Metal detector. Hand scanner. Photograph. His face became 3 pictures in 3 databases that would argue with one another about who he was. Klein took each step like a rung on a ladder above water. The warrant clicked from pending to served. The cuffs changed from plastic to steel. The door into holding accepted his body as if it had been built for that shape. When the lock thunked closed, Klein let the breath out she had hoarded too long. Price, she said. Notify Denver. Miller, call the warden. Oh. The lights went out. Not the chapel's theatrical hush. A clean, absolute severing. Generator's word. Emergency bars glowed red. A slender alarm, more embarrassed than panicked, raised its voice and then controlled it. In the brief frame before systems caught, Klein saw the holding cell door, thick, designed for men with hours to think and hours to try, slide open 3 inches and stop, an indecision that felt like a smirk. Close it, Price said to no one, to everyone. The control desk didn't answer. The monitors showed black. Klein moved on instinct. She crossed the floor and threw her shoulder into the door. It budged a half inch and then set like a jaw. On the other side, Stone did not move. He stood with his hands at his sides, head tilted, as if listening to a song that came from inside the walls. Don't, Miller said, stepping beside her. He didn't mean the door. He meant the choice the building is offering you. The emergency lights came up, a thin, coppery wash. The control panel chirped once and then began to scroll status lines in a language that pretended to be English. Klein read enough to be angry. Authorized override, authorized override, authorized override. Who authorized? She demanded, but the panel did not know how to tell her. Or had forgotten. What do you want? She asked through the opening, eyes on Stone's eyes. Want is the wrong word, he said. I prefer work. Then here's yours, she said. You're going to sit. You're going to wait. You're going to tell a court what midnight buys in this place. Courts like stories, he said. You have a talent for those. Klein pushed again. So did Miller. The door inched and then jolted as the building decided to help. The status screen blinked from override to error to compliant. Locks re-engaged. The door closed. It closed. It closed. Price swore and laughed at the same time, the hysterical little hybrid sound people make when a thing might be over. They triple-checked. They logged it. They printed it and watched the ink dry as if it could anchor truth. And then there was the bureaucratic scramble that comes after a crisis that pretends it wasn't: calls, forms, signatures, outraged emails written in sentences that had been stored in drafts for years. The warden's polished voice arrived to congratulate and caution in the same breath. Denver asked for ETA on transfer paperwork. A courier number was texted. A chain of custody bloomed like a vine. At 3:37, Klein walked past N7 out of habit more than hope. The jacket hung. The badge sat. The chapel camera hummed. The hallway smelled faintly of burned dust. She went home because even persistence requires a room where the ceiling is yours. She showered and stood under hot water until her skin believed heat again. She slept 2 hours and woke because her phone insisted. Price. No words in the message. Just a photo. She dressed in the dark and drove on roads that had not learned to forgive night. At the gate, the guard took longer than usual to find her name, though they both knew it by heart. Price was waiting inside the vestibule with a look that didn't know whether to be apology or rage. Say it, Klein said. They moved him, he said. Where? She asked. He swallowed. To camera. She stared. He handed her the printout: release forms complete, signatures correct, timestamps exact, custody transfer logged. The courier line showed a code she recognized: internal. The body he occupied, Price said, choosing his words as if each had a blade, is in a different room with a different badge and a different name. The man we held is a file now. Chain of custody, she said, though she was reading it in her hands. Unbroken, he said. And the video? She asked. He didn't answer. He led her to control. On the central screen, a loop played under a friendly caption: transfer 240 to 254. She watched herself and Price escort a cuffed man down a corridor. She watched doors open on time. She watched a signature flourish. She watched a body step into a van with a mesh screen. She watched the van pull away. The timestamp was clean. The motion was smooth. It was the night she had lived. It was not the night she had survived. Where did you get this? She asked. Denver sent it for our records, the text said, an apology hiding in professionalism. Said to log it everywhere. Klein leaned close to the playback and saw it. A blink at 2 hours 47 minutes and 9 seconds. Half a second of dropped lines, the faintest ripple in the blue. Enough for a trained eye. Not enough for a court. She closed her own eyes and saw the chapel. Hand on altar, lights out, device in a junction box. Saw the narrow slit of the holding door, then the jolt as it closed. She could not put those images next to the clean loop on the screen and make them coexist. What is he now? She asked softly. Price had an answer she hated. He's accounted for. The phrase hit her chest with the weight of granite. Accounted for is how systems sleep at night. She stood a long time with the weight. What do we have left? Miller asked from the doorway, his voice hoarse with the effort of not cursing. Klein turned. She held up the bag with the sticker peeled from the jacket hem, the disposable identity door token, and the little plastic cross she pulled from the altar's underside. 2 small lies that confessed to a larger one. What do we have left? Miller asked from the doorway, his voice hoarse with the effort of not cursing. Klein turned. She held up the bag with the sticker peeled from the jacket hem, the disposable identity door token, and the little plastic cross she'd pulled from the altar's underside. 2 small lies that confessed to a larger one. We have what we always had, she said. The difference is we know what to call it. Which is? Price asked. An institution, she said. Not a person. Silence settled. It wasn't surrender, it was calibration. Price nodded slowly. Miller glanced toward the chapel as if expecting it to eavesdrop. Write it, Price said. Write it all while it's still yours. She wrote. Not a press release, not the success Denver wanted to display like a medal, but an affidavit built from stubborn atoms. Times, devices, door behaviors, the hum of fans before and after outages, the specific blue a camera chooses when it lies. She named no brotherhood because myths are too easy to ignore. She named habits. She named choices. She named the human comfort with ritual that corrupt men exploit. When she finished, she did not feel better. She felt correct, which on some days is the only consolation the work offers. On her way out, she stopped in the chapel and stood where Stone had pressed his palm to the altar. The wood held the print the way a shore holds the memory of a wave for a minute before the tide considers something else. She placed her own hand there, not in defiance, not in prayer. In witness. If this story unsettled you, she said aloud to the empty pews, good? Stay unsettled. The day you relax is the day midnight buys 3 more minutes. The room gave her back her whisper. She turned and left. On the screen in control the loop continued, blue, clean, confident. In a week, another copy would replace it with a timestamp a second sharper, and then another, and gradually the original would slip out of archive and into a place where records go to wear the faces of things that never happened. 3 months later, a package would arrive at the field office without fingerprints. One sheet torn from a black notebook, block letters neat as patience. Transfer complete. New chapel. New camera. Same hours. And the city would be the same, the sky willfully untarnished, the desert still carrying the fortress on its back. People would sleep. The building would breathe. The work would continue. Consequence like faith would demand practice. Klein drove home under a morning that pretended it had nothing to do with nights. At a red light, her phone buzzed. A message from a number that had never introduced itself. If you thought this ended, you weren't watching the feed. She deleted it. She saved it. She did both at once in her own way. Then she said the only sentence that kept her feet moving, the one she trusted more than promises. This is not over. And somewhere in the labyrinth of concrete and habit, a green LED blinked as if in answer, as if to say, agreed.